Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining our 4th Parapsychology Australia online conference. My name is Joyce Bock. I am the Vice President of the Australian Institute of Parapsychological Research. I'm also a practicing psychologist, and my hobby is running salubrious events and helping out with AIPR. You are going to be fascinated, and you're in for a real treat. Today, we really have a smorgasbord of different parapsychological topics, including remote viewing, which is pretty much considered a technology utilized by the military intelligence, and using people to remote view and basically be a psychic spy. And David Morehouse will talk about that. We've got twins and telepathy. That would be fascinating. I don't know if you've noticed, but twins seem to have an uncanny telepathic communication. And I've known 2 sets of identical twins, and I've observed that as well. Interestingly, they have opposite personalities to each other, but they complement each other. And I know one set of twins where one brother had a vision of the other brother having a motorbike accident, and he raced right to his brother and saved his life. So yeah, I would be fascinated to hear Richard Silberstein's research on that. Phone calls from the dead. Can people who have died contact us? I just want to share a story too. Interestingly enough, I had a couple of phone calls many years ago from a friend. And when I picked up the phone, it was just static, but I could hear a faint little voice, but I couldn't hear anything else. It was just static. And that happened twice. And later on, I found out that she passed away before the phone calls were made. Also, I had a client who her husband passed away, and she had 2 missed calls on her phone from him. But the date showed 5 years in advance, and it was a date. It was the date of her daughter's birthday, 5 years in advance, and she showed me the phone. So the 2 missed calls showed the 5 years in advance, but the phone calls prior and after showed the correct date and time. So she took it to the Telstra shop and asked how that could have happened, and they couldn't figure out how that happened. So yeah, fascinating. And we'll be hearing more about that from Caleb Cooper. And astral projection. I can't think of a more lovely way to pass time during lockdown. I was in Melbourne, in 2020, and survived the 8-month lockdowns. But apparently some Generation Z people, kids, young people, experimented with astral projection where they met their favorite characters. So that's really fascinating and unique, and we'll be hearing more about that from Samantha. All right, so what is parapsychology? Well, basically it's the study of psychic and paranormal phenomena. And that is one of the things that we do at AIPR. We have, we do research, we educate, we've got some educational modules, courses that you can do, certificates. And when we have time, because we're all volunteers, we support people who may be going through paranormal attacks. I would like to just quickly maybe introduce the core committee. Lance. So Lance, Dr. Lance Storm, he is our academic from Adelaide University. Did you want to say hello?
Yep. Hi, everybody. My other role is editor of a couple of publications. So They are the Australian Journal of Parapsychology, which is a peer-reviewed journal, if you can see it there. That's what it looks like. You can subscribe online. And we also have a newsletter, ARPR News, which is more accessible. It's not peer-reviewed, it just has stories and events of a parapsychological nature that are in the news or whatever, in people's experience. And the newsletter comes free with the journal, and you can also download past issues for free if you wish. And the journal is also available as a PDF format at half price.
So great, thank you, Lance. So it's $70 and you get 2 journals or half price for online.
It's e-copy
per year. Yeah. Thanks.
There's courses available, sorry. There's also courses available, online courses, essay writing courses, if you're interested in finding out and studying parapsychology in a more formal format.
Thanks, Lance. We've got Rob Tilley, who is our resident. He's our public officer, but also our Ghostbuster. He's cleared more than 300 houses, including 2 recently. He's had 85% success rate.
You don't have it.
Yeah, so hi, Rob.
Hi, Joy.
Hi.
I'm in Sydney, the other side of the country.
Yes. That's Rob. We've got Sandra, who is a remote viewer herself, and she also does training in remote viewing. She's also an author and educator. I think, hello, Sandra. And we've got Terry. Is Terry here? He's a hypnotherapist in Queensland. He hasn't joined us yet. So I'd like to introduce now our president of AIPR, Dr. Vladimir Dubai, to say a few words. Vlad?
Hello, thank you. I thought for a second you forgot about me. When you're introducing everybody else.
Best for last.
So yeah, just wanted to welcome everybody. I think Joyce and Lance probably covered a lot of the material that I wanted to I guess, introduce. I'll just talk very broadly about the whole event. Essentially, the Parapsychology Australia online conference kind of was born out of the COVID lockdowns. So during COVID, the regular in-person conferences, for those who don't know, which were held in Sydney, couldn't be held. So we decided to do an online version, which has actually proved to be really, really popular, very successful. So that's how it started. Some of the people who may have seen the advertising online and so on would have seen things like Salubrious Events presents these presentations. Others might have seen AIPR presents these presentations. So there might be a little bit of confusion. The way it all kind of works is the Australian Institute of Parapsychological Research created the online version of the conferences, which is Parapsychology Australia Online. Joyce, who's the vice president, also happens to run her own publicity organisation, which is Salubrious Events, and so it's actually advertised via Joyce through Salubrious Events. So that's how the 3 different names all come together. And so hopefully that kind of makes sense, because I've had a few people asking, they were a little bit confused about AIPR and Salubrious Events and how the 2 join together. So the presentations are, in my opinion, amazing. And I say this every year, but every year it's the case. The topics that come through, presentations that are, the information that's presented is really eye-opening, very exciting stuff that's going through. And that's honestly every year, fascinating stuff. The Lance perhaps mentioned a little bit about the AIPR. It's the Australian-wide non-for-profit organisation that focuses on both education and research of parapsychology. So based on that, as Lance mentioned, we've got our own journal, peer-reviewed journal, which publishes twice a year. We've got a newsletter. We have certificate courses in parapsychology, various things. You can have a look online, brush up your skills and get a certificate in various aspects of parapsychology. We also assist members of the public. Rob Tilley, for example, he goes around actually assisting people who have paranormal experiences at home or elsewhere. There's a few other members that also assist. So we can assist members of the public both in helping resolve issues, education, and so on. Okay. Other than that, that's kind of the background of the group and how the online conferences have come to exist. And yeah, essentially, I hope that you enjoy these speakers today. Joyce, back to you.
Thank you, Vlad. Yeah, I just want to mention that all proceeds go to AIPR. So yeah, that doesn't go to salubrious events. We're a non-profit organisation, so we run on funds. And so yeah, I want to really thank everyone for coming here, getting a ticket, and that helps with the running of our organisation. David, so David Morehouse is an international best-selling author, educator, and former US Army Special Operations Officer, company and battalion commander. The last president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, invited Dr. Morehouse to present his alternative methods of conflict resolution at the first State of the World Forum in 1996. Dr. Morehouse lectures on global societal evolution, human consciousness, remote viewing, and the quantum physics of quantum mind to enhance human understanding of promise, possibility, and behavior. He has a Bachelor of Science from Brigham Young University and MMOAS from the US Army Command and General Staff College, and a doctorate from LaSalle University. Highly educated and highly experienced. Thank you so much, David. Welcome. And yeah, we're really looking forward to your speech. I just want to say I've had this book on my shelf since 1997.
Okay. Well, I guess first of all, you know, I am always humbled to think that this graying soldier on camera here, you know, he's thought to have something to offer. So, I mean, I thank you for this time with your institute and its members. And I'm also told that because I made a conscious and purposeful decision to remove myself from this field almost 20 years ago, that it's probably a good idea if I introduce myself to you and provide some context, some tone and texture, I guess, about who I am and what my journey through life has been thus far. You have a tendency to forget that people forget who you are if you haven't been on the scene for 20 years. And I haven't been on the scene for 20 years because in 2004, I just made the decision to pull myself out of the field of consciousness and to stop teaching remote viewing, to stop lecturing about it, and to do something else to support the mix that my country happened to be in at the time. It was a difficult decision, but it was a decision founded in just the factual reality of what was taking place at the time. Much had happened since the change of the millennium. Much had happened in all of the medical physical pursuits. Much had happened in the pursuit of wisdom and consciousness and awakening, becoming awakened and aware. At one time in the 90s, I counted somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3,600 active, viable, call them institutes of soul and spirit, things like the Omega Institute, Echelon, Kirpala, the Crossings, and all across Europe and other places, There were 3,600 of them that were in business and had a good student body and were doing a good business of teaching and pulling together teachers and authors and students so that they could mix and share. By 2003 and 2004, after the United States had entered its second war, the number of those institutions had dwindled down to somewhere in the neighborhood of about 320, meaning that people were beginning to fall off for a number of reasons. Late into the 90s, those who didn't think that what should have happened or what was going to happen in the year 2000 and the millennial change, a lot of other people peeled off from that point. Once the US entered a war in Afghanistan, people began to drop off from that point because what's the point? That's the way a lot of people saw it. And it didn't matter the institution and what they were trying to do. I had good friends, Ken and Joyce Beck, who owned the Crossings in Austin, Texas, which they spent literally tens of millions of dollars. Ken was the first marketing director for Dell Computers. And when he left, he cashed in all of his stock options and wanted to do something that honored his intuitive imperative, his ethical and moral imperatives to do something to contribute back in a way. And so 10,000 or tens of millions, somewhere close to $20 million spent in the development of the Crossings and sparing of no expense to create this wonderful institution for people to go to study from great teachers and masters and poets and artists and spiritual leaders and political leaders as they might show up, the great spa and other things. And that it's at this point almost a ghost town. I mean, Ken and Joyce sold it, but it never became what they envisioned it becoming. And in a lot, it was just because the world was at war again, and nobody even considered that it could go on for 20 years, but it did. In 2004, I made that decision to pull away from what I was doing and to try to find a way to contribute in a positive method, not to pick up a weapon and become a soldier again in that respect, but to work with soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines and special operators from around the world to work in the field of medicine, which was a passion of mine when I was in university at Brigham Young University. I was pre-med, but I made the decision that I did not want to be a physician. What I really wanted to be was a soldier. And that's what I became. But now I found myself going back to old friends from the Ranger battalion, battalion surgeons and others. And there was a whole new brand of medicine that was being taught called tactical combat casualty care, also called operational medicine, which is defined as actions at the point of wounding on the battlefield. And the military itself, recognizing this new brand of medicine, didn't have the skill set, and it didn't have the time, given the operational tempo of all of these units spinning up and deploying to war for 6 months to 13 months or longer, and then coming back and rotating back up through the training spin-up cycle again. So they started hiring contractors to teach operational medicine. And that's what I diverted into, and formed a very large company, was a partner initially with a company called Deployment Medicine International, and then branched off and formed my own company, and I've been doing that ever since. But about 3 years ago, I started to become reinterested in my involvement in teaching this message that was transformative for me back when I did it, and sharing that with folks. And it actually started just from an old friend of mine, Ted Abramson, coming and saying, hey, there's this new app, and I know you don't do social media. And he was right, I didn't. there's this new app and it's called, Clubhouse. And I really like to have you think you should come on Clubhouse and talk about remote viewing. I didn't, I have to say it was pretty funny because in my first days of doing this with him, we were doing like 4-hour shows. And I found myself to be highly agitated by the questions and the way in which they were being asked, and how the entire perspective of what remote viewing was, or what consciousness was, or human promise and potential and possibility, all of those things had kind of really morphed itself into other ways of being and being looked at and accepted within the community that we all find ourselves in. And it caused me to start thinking again about, if I was going to be re-engaging in this, how was I going to re-engage in this? And what was the message going to be? And one of the things that I found was that people never fully understood, and perhaps it was because I might not have understood it at that time myself completely, or maybe I just didn't know how to explain it as a younger man. But why did I do what I did to write the book Psychic Warrior and expose a highly classified and highly controversial intelligence collection program that was the CIA, DIA, Directorate of Science and Technology remote viewing program, which at the time I was in it was codenamed Grill Flame. Grill Flame, Sunstreak, and Stargate was something that happened after I left. I wanted to readdress that with people because there was a very distinct reason as to why I did what I did. It had nothing to do with trying to be the first guy to tell the story. It had absolutely nothing to do with the monetary value of a book or of fame collected because of writing the book. It had everything to do with simply saying that this changed my life. It transformed me as a human being and allowed me to redefine my purpose. Now, that's an easy and soft way of saying that. There were also aspects of that transformation that went along with some of the other things in the unit that just frankly were not done well or were not thought out. Primarily, the unit was comprised of individuals who had claimed a psychic ability somewhere along the line. That's how they got noticed, and that's how they were recruited into the organization. And when they were there, the vast majority of them made that their career. Some of them were there 15 years, some 17 years. That's just unheard of in a military career, that somebody coming out of any aspect of any branch of the military or in a civilian pursuit as a GS worker or something would go and spend, the slang is to drop anchor in an organization and never move. So I never had the intention of doing that. But when people do those kinds of things, it builds in there sort of this institutional laziness where there are things that should happen in order to bring new blood into the organization, to keep standards of performance and training and education in the unit high. Those things didn't occur. When I arrived there, and I'll tell you the story about how I got there, but just let me preface this with this. There was no training manual. Now, this was an organization that had been in existence for 13 years by the time I got there, and there was no training manual. There was no program of instruction. There was no outline or training outline. There were no training standards, intermediate training objectives, terminal training objectives, performance outcomes, nothing. For a guy who, like me, who was built to be a trainer and an educator of men for combat, as a Ranger company commander, as an airborne rifle company commander for 4 years in those kinds of jobs when most of my peers had 18 months. Having been labeled the preeminent trainer in the 75th Ranger Regiment, I knew how to train. I never thought in my life that I was going to be derailed for any reason whatsoever off of my pursuit in following, the written evaluations about me that made me start to believe my own press, and also made me believe that my life was on purpose because the military came easily to me. I learned that being on purpose is not necessarily defined by what one does well. I mean, it can be, but not necessarily does that define your purpose in this life. And not necessarily is the thing that you do well the calling that helps you honor that purpose. So all of these things are things that I found out through the art and the science of remote viewing when I got into that unit. But what was my life up to that point? And then I'll pick this piece of the story back up again. My life by all designs was sort of preordained to follow certain categorical and moral imperatives that were developed primarily by my grandfather. My great-grandfather brought his family from Europe into this part of the world. And to put it really bluntly, the family was kind of a dark family. They were notorious for running houses of prostitution. They ran wagon programs to move supplies around cities and other things, and they were linked throughout the Midwest into a number of cities, spiraling around Omaha, Nebraska, and pretty much anything that was being moved, it was being moved by the Morehouse family. And by the way, Morehouse was a name that was taken to replace another name because the other name would have drawn too much attention to the family. So Morehouse was not a name of origin for the family. It was a taken name by my great-grandfather. My grandfather made a conscious decision to bring about a paradigm shift in his life because he already had 2 sons and probably another on the way, and then ended up with another daughter. And he approached his father and asked for permission to step out of and have nothing to do with that part of the family life. And he was told, go with his blessing, my great-grandfather's blessing. My grandfather then went on to become a railroad engineer, moved away from Omaha, was a railroad engineer, and then became an Army officer in the Army Reserves and fought in World War II as a colonel of infantry. My grandfather inspired his sons and brought them up to understand that the greatest thing that someone can do in life is to not get caught up in the increasing anxiety of caring about yourself. And it wasn't about, the whole idea of selfishness was not being defined by my grandfather to his sons and daughter. It wasn't about not caring about other people. It was about caring too much about yourself. If you didn't care too much about yourself, then it was impossible for you to be selfish because you could only then be a giving, sacrificing, selfless person who operates in the service of others. And that was my grandfather to my father. One of my father's brothers joined the Marine Corps and fought in World War II, actually stormed the beaches of Iwo Jima. My father joined the Army and fought all the way through World War II and then also through Korea. The other brother was too small and had pneumonia multiple times. And so he joined the United States Forest Service and spent World War II putting out forest fires in central and northern California forests, working with a unit that was called the 555, the 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion, which was an all-black parachute infantry battalion that was not sent to go to combat in Europe, but kept in the Western United States to fight the forest fires that were raging because the Empire of Japan had developed incendiary balloons that they would send up into the jet stream that would come follow the jet stream over into Oregon and California. And based on timing and barometric pressures, they would release their incendiary cargo, which would drop down, burst into the forest, and start a forest fire. So there was an entire war front in the Western United States that many people don't even know ever took place. And so all of those young men and that family were involved in some way in this selfless service and sacrifice. So I think that despite my best efforts to avoid it, that part of my life was kind of preordained that I was going to at least step into that. I fought it. I didn't think I wanted to do it. I actually avoided an appointment to a academy, and I did so by disappearing across the border into Mexico with one of my best friends, who we thought I was age 17 when I graduated. We were going to open up a bar on the beach at a place called Puerto Penasco, Mexico, and stupid 17-year-old gringos down in Puerto Penasco don't get to open up bars. So after about 30 days of picking up beer bottles in the sand for a nickel a piece, we had gone through all of our burrito and beer money, and so we came back. My father was not happy about what I had turned down in order to go do that. Cliff's father was an architect in California, no less, and so he was quite enamored of his son's journey off to go sow some wild oats and be a crazy man, and welcoming him back with big arms. My father was just the opposite, could be very angry and said, you get three choices. I got your appointment committed over to an ROTC scholarship, 4 years. And if you don't do that, then there will be consequences, like you're going to be a private in the Army. So you have a choice, three choices of a school. First choice I made was Berkeley. It was 1973, and my father, they had burned the ROTC building at Berkeley. So my father was, no, okay, strike one. What was your next choice? And I said something like Stanford. And then it was, no, there's like 20 cadets in the ROTC at Stanford. You're not going to Stanford. So he said, that's it. I'm picking the next place. The next place was Brigham Young University. Why? Not because I was a Mormon, because I wasn't, nor was my father. I was sent there because my father was an avid golfer, and Johnny Miller, who was a Mormon and who had played golf for BYU, was like the Tiger Woods of his time. And so for that reason, I ended up going to BYU on a ROTC scholarship and a wrestling scholarship. When I got to BYU, I did everything that I could do not to fall in love with the Army program that was there, but there were 500 cadets in the ROTC program there. And there were some 250 to 300 Air Force cadets in their program. So it was easy to see that there was supportive interest and that it was a safe and good place to be. And the first time I did anything with them was my first journey into what it was going to be like to be a soldier or a leader. And it happened as easily as if I were taking a breath. And so by the time I went to the summer camp for between your junior and senior years, I went to jump school and to Ranger school, which was there were only 3 of us out of BYU. The rest of them all went to what's called advanced camp. And out of jump school, out of 500 cadets that were in the regular Army that were paratroopers in the basic airborne school, I was a distinguished honor graduate, and then went through Ranger school. We started 168 Ranger students, and we graduated like 23, put on a Ranger tab. And again, I was the number 1 out of that class. So I came back to be the student brigade commander. And when I was the student brigade commander, one of the last things that happened when I was there is the professor of military science at the time, Colonel Bartley E. Day, took my wife, Debbie at the time, and I to dinner. And when he took us to dinner, he prophetically said to me, which made no sense to me whatsoever, he said, at some point in your career, even as an infantry officer, you are going to be asked to participate in the intelligence community. If you are asked to do that, turn down that assignment. If you are ordered to do that, get a gun and shoot yourself in the head, because you will never recover from what happens to you as a result of that participation. You'll never recover with your family. You'll never recover spiritually, and you will never recover in your own sense of self-worth if you go do that. I ignored every bit of that. I mean, I couldn't even figure out why he would have ever said something like that to me, but he did. So into the Army I go, and by the time I've got a year under my belt, I've already become not only a graduate of the Infantry Officers Basic course, but I'm a Pathfinder, and I've gone to the Infantry Mortar Platoon Leaders course. I go to Panama, my first assignment, Infantry Mortar Platoon Leader, then I'm an Airborne Rifle Platoon Leader, then I'm an aide to a 1-star general, becomes a 2-star general, then I am later an aide to a guy that becomes a 4-star general, Sink South, and then I am, as a first lieutenant, given command of the Army's only separate airborne rifle company in Panama, a job that had only previously been given to senior captains getting ready to make major, and I hadn't even made captain yet. I barely outranked the young officers under my command. And while I'm there, when I leave there, I go to the 1st Ranger Battalion, and I start off as an assistant operations officer, then I'm a personnel officer, and then I'm given command of a Ranger company. I get 2 years in each of these companies, which is unheard of. Usually it's 18 months in a company for anybody, and most people never get to go to a Ranger battalion. In commanding Ranger company, I got to be an extraordinarily good trainer, because I was trained by General Lure, who was the man who actually formed 1st Ranger Battalion in 1974 under the General Creighton Abrams, Chief of Staff of the Army, charter to reform that Ranger Battalion. I am sent to the Kingdom of Jordan in the last 6 months of my company command to train Jordanian Rangers. And I am there in a place, after about 5 weeks or so, in a place called Bat El Ghul. I am told by the Jordanian Ranger company or battalion commander that translates as the belly of the beast. It's supposed to be a haunted valley. It's a place that looks like, quite literally, you are on the moon. There is nothing, but there are fossils everywhere in the rock formations of foliage, of ferns, and things of that ilk. So it was once upon a time near water, by water, inhabited, during the reptile period or something else. It was an amazing, mystical, strange place. It was a place where in this valley, the Hodge Road ran along the northeastern side of the valley, and it ran parallel to, and sometimes went under, this narrow gauge railroad that was the railroad built by the Germans under contract to the Turks at the turn of the century. The same railroad that Sir Lawrence used to blow up with his Bedouin raiders. In addition to all else that happened in this place, I got permission to blow that same railroad up, and in fact, have a piece of it in my office just for sake of doing it. In this place that was haunted, allegedly, Jordanian soldiers, when the wind would blow hard, you could hear them scream because they were certain a banshee was moving around the tent or something else. Who were these ghosts supposed to be? They were supposed to be those that were guarding those who moved along the Hajj road to Mecca on their pilgrimage to Mecca, and that were supposed to be testing their worthiness to be on that road, to be on the pilgrimage, and to go to Mecca. In this place, I was in an exercise with a ranger company, but we were supported by Jordanians in a support by fire position. Very long story short, it was a complex live fire operation training, not combat, but training for combat. And I was shot in the helmet by a Jordanian machine gun bullet. That's 2,800 feet per second. So it didn't ricochet off of the Kevlar helmet. It hit the Kevlar helmet. It was caught between the Kevlar layers. So the transfer of that kinetic energy at 2,800 feet per second was sufficient to pull me off my feet and knock me unconscious. That was the first time that things shifted in my life in a fairly dramatic way. I had a vision, and over the years, I have struggled to tell the story of that vision and what the significance of it was. And I freely admit that in the early days of attempting to tell that story, it was me trying to supplant the responsibility of that message to something outside myself, like some messenger or some guide or some angel or some entity or something else. As I have grown older and more self-assured in who I am and what I have become, and the role that I have played in becoming that thing or that person, I am certain that the message was not from some external messenger. The message was me talking to me, sending a message to me. And what that message was, simply stated, was you have chosen the wrong path in life. You are to choose a new path. In other words, you're not on purpose, David. You need to find your purpose. Now, I will tell you this, that was profound and unsettling. And I, of course, did what any good Ranger Company commander would do. I ignored every bit of that. When I came to, all I did was try to make sure everybody understood that I was fine, that there was, I could stay in command. I didn't need to be shipped back home and somebody else given my job. And I stayed in that position. Several months later, it became time for me to change command and to go to another position. Very long story short, where I was supposed to go didn't happen. I was supposed to go to Italy to be an aide to an Italian general. That didn't occur. And so I was now a free agent. That's not a good thing to be as a former Ranger Company commander, because personnel officers start to salivate at the things they might be able to stuff you into at that point. I was earmarked for a black book assignment to go to El Salvador. I wasn't certain exactly what that assignment was going to be, but given my history in the special operations world and being now a regimentally affiliated special operations combat arms infantry officer, you can only use your imagination. There was a war against communism raging in El Salvador, and the US was a huge part of that. So now I was earmarked to go to El Salvador to the Mill Group and serve in some capacity there, which I didn't fully understand. The Ranger Regimental Commander, Colonel Joseph Stringham, flew to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to the Aberdeen training facility where we were training, and came in and pulled me aside into an empty mess hall and sat me down and explained to me what that job was going to be and why he was not going to allow me to do it. Now, I'm not going to tell you, I don't know exactly what it was, but the good colonel made a hand and arm signal to me of a finger pulling a trigger and told me, you're not that kind of guy. So I'm assuming that it had something to do with the Phoenix program that was set up in El Salvador. That was a template of the Phoenix project program that came out of Special Operations Group in Vietnam. So it was an assassination program of some sort, and they were looking for guys with special operations background to plug into that program. Yeah, I was really thankful for him intervening in that, because yeah, I'm not that guy. I would not, that would have been kind of the unraveling of all things for me. My job that I was picked up for was to go to a top secret special access program that was codenamed Royal Cape. It's also called by its nickname, The Activity. There's another name you may have heard it referenced by, and that is called the Secret Army of Northern Virginia. There is a book that was written called Killer Elite. You can get it on Amazon. I have nothing to do with it, but I will tell you I've read it, and it is uncanny in its accuracy of telling the story of this very secretive unit that I was brought into to be the deputy executive officer there. One of the things that happens in this unit is, because in this world of Department of the Army special access roster, sort of covert assignments that you get into, for me, it was like the first circle of hell that the universe was sending me to for not listening to the message I gave to myself when I got zinged in the head, in the helmet rather, by a machine gun bullet. And that quite simply was, now I'm in the Department of the Army Special Access roster, which means that your file is no longer an infantry branch. Now it goes into the DASSER file, where DASSER people keep your file, and they're all special operations folks. And if anybody types your name into the big supercomputer of the Army, it comes back and says, service member not on file. That's what it says. So you no longer exist. As far as any of your friends and colleagues are concerned, you are now in this pocket of special people doing what those people do. The mission of Royal Cape was to develop support infrastructures to support clandestine and covert military operations in Tier 1 and Tier 2 countries. Example, in the failed Iranian hostage rescue attempt, that was essentially the birthplace of ISA, of the activity. That was a place where they needed to find witting corporations to supply trucks, safe houses, medical care, anything else that they might need to help gather intel or support the operation itself. That was where the Army understood that if they were going to do these kinds of things, and in the world that was developing in front of them, it was an understanding or understood that that was going to have to be developed by each individual service that had whatever kind of a special operations program that it had. I can remember sitting at ISA and listening to CIA's Claire George very clearly say, the reason you guys exist is because it's not our job to do what you do in the agency. We are responsible for industrial, economic, and political espionage. We have nothing to do with supporting your military operation. Of course, that's all changed over the decades since that time, but that's where we were in the 1980s with this new formation of so many different things that occurred in the 1970s and moving into the 80s. Redefining how America was going to keep its military. I was part of the organization, and kind of what goes on in the organization is this. Every 4 to 6 months, you're required to sit down and do a counterintelligence polygraph. That's not a full lifestyle poly, it's just a counterintel poly. They want to ask you questions like, do you know any, did you ever disclose classified information? Have you ever stolen classified documents? Do you know anybody that has? That kind of thing. Once you pass your CI poly, assuming you do, then you are to sit down in this organization with a psychologist called the command psychologist, a lieutenant colonel, who's detailed there to keep his kind of finger on the psychiatric pulse of the organization. Why do they have a psychologist there? Because as Colonel Bartley E. Day said, you'll never recover from your journey through that world. And the people who were in that world were not intel people. Most of them were special operations, special forces, or Rangers, or Marine Raiders, or recon. There were those kinds of things that were in there. It was a purple assignment, meaning a joint assignment, but there weren't a lot of just dyed-in-the-wool, hardcore, forever intel folks. So most of the people that had been there for any amount of time were on their second or third marriage. There was a lot of addiction going on there with alcohol and anything else that you might think you could be addicted to. There were breakdowns within the command structure in this organization. I actually saw a colonel fight with a sergeant major over a female E4 at the water fountain, in the hallway, outside the command group. Had to help break it up, for Pete's sake. It was a troubling place to be, but it served a role. But when I sat down with this psychologist, he answers you a series of questions because he's looking for cracks in your armor. And I flew through that all the way to the last question, which was the creepy one, where he just leans into you and says, is there anything else you would like to share with me now before we end this? The first time I thought that was creepy. The second time it was worse. But I went through my second poly and I had some trouble with it. The reason I had trouble with it, to roll back, is what happened after I got zinged in the helmet in the desert in Jordan is I started to have out-of-body experiences. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know why it was. I didn't know anything about it. It was never in my purview to study or read about those kinds of things. I never thought, the idea that I might use a word psychic never entered my lexicon. It was never something I thought about. Metaphysical pursuits were nothing that were in my library. Nothing to do with any of those things. Yeah, mathematics and physics and all the things that you would do as a pre-med student going through university and that was there for me, and I understood that, and that was part of my life. And I was very empirical in my analysis of things and my preparation and training, etc. I was consider myself an academic educator and trainer of men. So I never really understood what was happening to me. And I know there's somebody that's going to be in this lecture lineup that will talk about those kinds of things for you, and that's good. It should be interesting. For me, it was uncontrolled, and while fascinating, was disruptive to what I thought was supposed to be going on in my life. So I then started trying to meditate because somebody mentioned to me that maybe meditation would help. I didn't really know what that meant. That's how much of a bonehead I was about these kinds of things. So I read up on it. I have to go to the post library and read up. They didn't have books online and stuff like that. Internet wasn't even available at that time. So not for us anyway. And I just didn't know what to do with it. So I dabbled in this. I bought some cassette tapes that were supposed to help, back and forth. So when I do my counterintelligence poly, the second one, I can't help but decide that I'm going to relax through meditation to go through this polygraph. Not a good idea, because what ends up happening on the other end of that is the CI polygrapher goes, he didn't tag me as deception indicated, but he remarked the results were inconclusive. That meant when I went in to see the psychologist, he had been armed with that information. He seemed to have this gleeful way about him, like he had some lever now. And we went through the process of the questions, and then he leaned over and asked that creepy question, are you sure that there's nothing you would like to share with me or talk to me about before we end this? And at that point, I just, for whatever reason, perhaps out of concern for what was happening with me, because at this point I had recorded 4, possibly 5 different out-of-body experiences that had happened since being hit in the helmet by a machine gun bullet. And so I told him about that. And I told him about being knocked out and about the vision that I had had. And I am, in all honesty, saying to you, I admit that I kind of half thought that what he was going to do was pick up the phone and call Walter Reed Army Medical Center and book me a bay over there to go see somebody, where I would then be fed a cocktail of psychotropic medications to put a harness on whatever was happening to me. And that's not what happened. He walks over to a file safe, opens it up, and pulls out 3 blue folders. And in each of those folders were stamped "Secret Grill Flame." And he handed them to me, and he said, everything will be okay. Read these and let's talk about them tomorrow morning. I went over to my office, brewed a pot of coffee. I was in a secret compartmented information facility, so having classified documents out on my desk all night, that was norm. And I read through these things. And I won't bore you with the details of them, but I will tell you the one piece that I read that was poignant to me, that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck, because I'm a U.S. Army Special Operations officer. I'm sitting in a historically controversial, top secret classified unit, and I'm reading secret documents about a codenamed special access program that I don't know what it is. But to me, it could not be more legitimate. And here I am reading the text of 2 people having a conversation referred to as numbers, not referred to by names. And one person is clearly steering the other person and asking questions of the other person, and the other person is answering questions, describing things. And the person who is, in retrospect, acting as a monitor says to the other person who's doing the work, let me know when you're outside the building where you're supposed to be. Several lines down, that person says, okay, I think I'm where I'm supposed to be now. The manhole cover is behind me, and there's a door in front of me. The other person in this transcribed classified document says, good, now pass through the wall and describe the contents of the room to me. I read that 50 times in 3 seconds. Pass through the wall and describe the contents of the room to me. The next morning, I'd been there all night, rereading and reading and trying to make sense of it all. The good doctor comes in and he takes the 3 folders and hands me 3 more. I, over the next few weeks and months, was handed dozens and dozens of these documents to read. I was not told what they were. He was just fishing to see how I would respond, how I'd react. Would I be intrigued or would I be off-put by the contents or by his inability to disclose fully what it was all about? In about 4 months, I'm driven from Royal Cape to Fort Meade, Maryland, to meet the people in this unit. I come in through a giant metal, key guarded combination locked door in this old building that's an old World War II baker's school, as it turns out. And across the wall from the entrance is a giant wall mural, and it's a galaxy. It's a galaxy with red gaseous clouds and stars. It's this cosmic art painting across the floor. I mean, across the floor from the door. So I just thought to myself quietly, that's not something you see every day in a military organization. Usually it's pictures of what the heck ever else that unit does on the wall. And then I'm led back. The doctor peels off to go talk to the program manager, a guy by the name of Fern Gavin, a GS-15. Pardon me. And I'm brought to the back, and I meet in the back Angela, Robin, and Mel Riley, who is sewing beads onto a piece of a brain tanned deer hide, deer skin. And behind him are dream drums and tomahawks and axes and, spears and you name it, breastplates and everything else that he's worked on and done. And he's quite masterful at it. The girls that are there, Angela and Robin, have black cloths draping over gray army desks, and they are practicing with tarot cards. I'm an airborne ranger, and all of a sudden I'm seeing this. I don't have any idea what to make out of this, but you can only imagine what was going through my head. Again, none of this is something I've ever seen in a military organization. And then I meet the rest of the crew, Lynn, Gabrielle, Paul, Ed. And then finally I'm taken in to meet Fern. And when I sat down with Fern alone, Fern says, I'm always impressed that there are young officers who are willing to give everything up to come be here. Which to my amazement was not what I expected to hear, because I really had no idea what it was they did there. And I wasn't aware that I'd be giving anything up to be there, or I hadn't agreed to a thing at that juncture. So what are you talking about? I said, I don't know what you do here. I've been looking at things that you do, but I don't know what you do here. And he said to me, what we do here is we train people to transcend space and time, to view persons, places, or things remote in space and time, and to gather and report intelligence information on the same. That's what we do here. And we'd like you to be here. Yeah. That's one of those times when, the room gets smaller and you can't figure out what's happening, and you get a little bit of vertigo and, everything else. And you're thinking, Jesus, do I really? I mean, seriously, that's what you do here. But there was a piece of me, I admit, that was intrigued by this. Wouldn't you have been? Part of me wanted the logic side of me, the scientist side of me wanted to just get up and walk out and dismiss it as, oh my God, and then the other piece of me was like, well, maybe I can figure out what's happening with these out of body things, or what that message was, and all those kinds of things. These things that were beyond the physical. Because what I did know at this point is I remembered reading on an airplane in an in-flight magazine that there had been a poll done by CNN back in the 70s. And in the poll, there were some 2,000 respondents, and they asked two simple questions. The first question was, how many of you believe that there is something beyond the physical? And the respondents came back, all 2,000, 98% said, I believe there is something beyond the physical. 2% said, there's nothing beyond the physical. It's this life, you die, that's it, it's over, done. That same 2%, give or take a few percentage points, still exists to this day. And my counsel to you is that 2% is not your responsibility. That 2% is nothing you need to care about. That 2% is those folks who, from whatever background they might originate from, are the ones that will look for people who are in this realm of exploring, researching consciousness, and they will find the weakest of you who does not adhere to principles and rules, and they will single you out and make examples of you by attempting to destroy your reputation and your work and your message and everything else, which is why there are rules that we have to talk about that govern what we do in this pursuit of consciousness that drives us so heavily now. But there are lots of people that can't let go of that 2%. They feel like there's some obligation on their part to convince that 2% to see it their way. That is not your obligation. Let that 2% be that 2%. However, in the 98%, they got to answer the second question in this magazine that said, so you believe in something beyond the physical. Do you believe that you will ever be able to realize that in this lifetime? Will you ever interact with it, connect with it, learn from it, contribute to it, listen to it, anything? Will you ever be able to be touched by that thing which you believe is not, which is beyond the physical? Of that 98% that responded, only 24% came back and said, responded in the affirmative. Yes, I believe there's something beyond the physical. Yes, I believe I am part of it. Yes, I believe I can interact with it, learn from it, contribute to it, etc. 76% of that agnostic, fall squarely into that agnostic. There's something out there I believe, but I don't know. And I don't believe that I will ever realize it, see it, hear from it, learn, contribute, or be a part of it in any way. It's just a belief structure for me. Your job, your mission, your purpose, if you will, should be to focus on that 76%. Because that 76% of the population of true believers that there is something beyond the physical is a powerful, yet dormant, sterile percentage of the population that will blow whichever way the driving winds of negativity or limitation blow them, because they don't believe that they will ever realize anything beyond the physical in this lifetime. That is who you're trying to influence in the work that you do. And to do that requires certain standards and rules and obligations in truth and in the scientific exploration and validation of what it is that you do. The empirically driven evidence to establish what you're doing. The absence of brio and an abundance of humility in what you do. And that is critical to this equation, because step outside of that, violate the rules that govern our conduct. And what ends up happening is, as I said, they will single you out. as something that is easily refuted and destroyed. And it has happened. And in my particular field of remote viewing, there are 3 rules that apply to it. I teach it to every class, to every student. Rule number 1, remote viewing is not 100% accurate. It never has been. It never will be. Do not ever say that it is. Why is it not 100% accurate? Because it is a human interpretation of a waveform expression existing in an omnipresent, omnidirectional presence within the holographic matrix field, within 8-dimensional hyperspace. And all the human brain does is detect, decode, and objectify. Detect, decode, and objectify that waveform expression of data. It's a human interpretation. It is never 100% accurate. Hence, rule number 2. You never trust the results of a single remote viewer operating independently of other remote viewers. You never trust the results of a single remote viewer. Why? Because of rule number 1. Okay? Everything we do in this life, no matter what your pursuit, no matter what your discipline or your endeavor, everything we do, everything moves in cycles. We have peaks, we have valleys, we have changing, wavelengths, we have changing amplitudes in what we do. Everything we do, everything from a quantum perspective is energy, and therefore everything can be expressed in waveform on some level. Even our own personal performance in everything that we do. Nothing is ever the same. No, nothing is ever perfectly templated or duplicated. We do some things well one day, better the next day, lesser the following day, really bad the day after that, and oh my God, the day after that, and then it'll cycle back up again. But everything is in a cycle. So you never trust one viewer operating independently of other viewers. All of us are better than one of us. So we just finished a project of remote viewing for the History Channel. Sandra was part of that. So was Mari down there, probably some others in here that I can't see the list, but 70 remote viewers from 6 countries, 6 or 7 countries, did some work for the History Channel for the Skinwalker Ranch. It'll be on next week. It's called Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. And you'll get to see a practical application of the work done by 70 skilled, trained remote viewers, all trained by me and trained in the exact protocols that I was trained in. And I did that and mandated it that way because I needed to make sure that there was consistency in their product. They're in their collection product, consistency in their summary methodology, so that I could use it. As it stood, it was literally thousands upon thousands of data points. I mean, somewhere in a neighborhood of like 8,500 data points that had to be analyzed, correlated rather, and captured, to be thrown on camera, all of which the delivery took in total 5 hours, and it'll probably be 8 minutes on the camera. So I have no idea exactly what it'll show up like, but there's supposed to also be a behind the scenes thing, which should be interesting because that'll probably encompass a great more of their work. It should be fun to see. Rule number 3 in remote viewing is not a standalone endeavor. It was designed, it was built, it was created to be used in consonance with other collection methodologies. In the military intelligence world, it was made to be used with SIGINT, ELINT, FODINT, HUMINT, the 34 other intelligence collection methodologies that are out there now. Remote viewing was just one more provider of pieces of that puzzle. Not one of the intelligence collection methodologies is 100% accurate, including remote viewing, obviously. None of them are 100% accurate. In fact, some of the ones that you would think might be accurate are never accurate, like HUMINT. I mean, we went to war in Iraq armed with the human intelligence provided by 1, 2, or 3 people about weapons of mass destruction. And oh yeah, you know, there was selective listening on the part of the administration, but the case in point is human intelligence is inaccurate. By its nature, it's inaccurate because everybody sees things in a different way and nobody processes or passes the intelligence that they think they have in exactly the same way. And then the human analyst that takes it, the case officer running them, or, you know, passing the information themselves, everything gets distilled and filtered and interpreted again and again and again. And even in electronic intelligence, it's the same thing. It has to be heard, recorded, and analyzed by human ears with human consciousness, and then turned around and interpreted to mean this or mean that. And there's nothing that makes it better. AI is not better, it's just more efficient, but it is not necessarily better. And it too can have its own errors. So it's not meant to be a standalone endeavor. So that means that if you're going to use it as a law enforcement and investigative tool, there are protocols for that. And there are standards for that. There are procedures for that. You don't do unsolicited work and send it to a police department. My son is a detective, in addition to being a command sergeant major in the Maryland Army National Guard, but he's been a detective for 18 years. And he knows what I've done. I mean, he knows what I do, you know, in the remote viewing unit and teaching it, et cetera. And he, like most cops who have been on the job for a long time, are hyper intuitive. You know, they call it you know, in the military now, a new term has been adopted called spidey sense. My spidey sense tells me that there are Taliban over that hill, or that we shouldn't go down this road, or such and such. And police officers use the term my gut. You know, my gut tells me this is right or that's wrong. I shouldn't do this, that. They're talking about intuition, being intuitive about things that they cannot see or understand, but their gut, their intuition tells them to do this or that and not this or that. So he's aware of those things. And I ask him, you know, what do you do if somebody turns around, some independent person claiming to be a remote viewer, you know, does something based on a missing person and sends it into you, or a murder case? What do you do with it? He said, we throw it in the trash. I go, don't you even look at it and like share it and pass it around? He goes, no. He goes, no, we don't. We absolutely do not. So the only time I've ever seen that work is where there has been a protocol approach to it, working with Detective Lieutenant Sam Bowerman, the Baltimore County Police Department, many years ago. Mel Riley, myself, and Lynn Buchanan worked a missing persons case with them. And we worked it over multiple sessions over a couple of days. It was the first time that had ever been filmed by film crews. It was uncomfortable, to say the least. And the data that was produced set the homicide office on fire. They could barely contain themselves, because we were providing data that both validated what they thought they already knew and also filled in the blanks on things that they didn't know. And then they had an ability to ask reframing or focusing questions that we were then able to go back in and do more sessions to try to answer those, and did. And the information was fed into an FBI topographical terrain matching program, where terrain data that we were feeding in from the session, talking about lakes or piers and lakes and forests and other things and iron bridges and those things, a white horse with a wing on a very high pole, all these things, which all in the computer matched up to landmarks and things that were in the area and along the way to where they believed this individual destroyed the car of the victim, and to a lake and a pier where they believed the body probably was. But that all distilled down to this. It distilled down to, can you show us right on the ground where it is? No, not in 4 sessions. Well, you know, then it became a production issue for the film, right? A production thing for CBS reports, 2020, whoever was doing it. Well, we can't keep everybody here to do this. You guys got to put something out now. We can't do that. We need downtime. We need to think about this. We need to come back and then do more sessions, you know, a day, and then maybe more sessions the following day. If you want us to narrow this down some more, there wasn't time for that. Didn't want to do that. There wasn't time. There wasn't budget for that. Then I posed to Lieutenant Bowerman. Can't you go out? I mean, for Pete's sake, man, we've narrowed it down to the lake, you know, the area around the lake, a ravine with a part of the body exposed. Can't you go out there and look? And the answer was simple. No, you can't. We don't have the manpower. We don't have the money. We don't have the time. You guys can't make an X on the ground on a map for us to go. We can't do it. We don't have cadaver dogs, and we can't get them. We cannot drag that lake. We cannot drain that lake. We don't have ground penetrating radar that we can go, you know, around a 5-mile perimeter on a lake. If you cannot narrow it down more than just on the west side of the lake, then we're stuck. And that's where that ended. Other police work that had been done with the New Jersey State Troopers and the Carteret Police Department in New Jersey, body found, you know, that one happened, but they had the assets and the time, and it involved an entire police department, the homicide department, being trained as remote viewers and then working the target. And there have been others, but they have to be worked that way. And you have to be able to, on all sides, to take it to fruition, to completion, to a standard, and to do it. Employing this in History Channel to be basically kind of an enigma penetration task force to kind of provide answers where the scientific measurement of what's happening, you know, under this new term, high strangeness, with all of the anomalous activity and just going, geez, I don't understand that. I've never seen that before. There gets to a point where people don't want to hear, I've never seen that before, and I don't know what that is. Remote viewers operating in a team can produce information that provides at least a glimpse, you know, under the circus tent to actually what might be going on there. And according, you know, to Travis, that's the kind of information that they want and that they need to help steer the investigative effort in what they're doing out there. So for those of you that are going to go that kind of direction with remote viewing, if you do, is adhering to the rules and providing a quality product, that it's paramount to that. Because if it's one person saying, I can sit in a room and go into an altered state of consciousness, and I can tell you with a high degree of accuracy what's actually taking place there, it's not only implausible, it's just stupid. It is undermining the principles and the ethics of what we're all trying to do in the pursuit of the investigation and the utilization of consciousness and conscious awareness to become awake and aware. And I, in all honesty, am not so opposed to people who do those kinds of things and then destroy their own reputations. The problem is that when your reputation is destroyed, you drive maybe 1% of that 76% who might have crossed the threshold to become students of consciousness, to learn that they are more than the physical, to learn that they are omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, and eternal beings, that their lives are filled with potential and possibility and promise. You destroy that opportunity for them because you're shown to be a charlatan. You're shown that you're just boasting of a capability that you can't back up. Because if you can take those 3 rules I just gave you that pertain to remote viewing, and you can apply that to something else, whatever your discipline is that you do. Don't try to be a standalone program, and don't relegate what you're doing to a parlor trick. I mean, don't do that, because they will be out there. And unfortunately, most of the guys that are on that come out of, Psychops, it's under another name now, where the amazing Randy was before he died, and, a bunch of Ray Hyman and a few others, Michael Shermer. I mean, Michael Shermer, as a skeptic, I get that guy. Michael Shermer was a theology student. He was in the seminary, studying in seminary. The only reason that he stopped, this is the guy that used to write the Skeptical Inquirer for Scientific American. He stopped pursuing a degree in theology, in studying in seminary, because they told him to continue. He was going to have to learn Aramaic and Hebrew and other things. And he was like, I'm not doing that. So he transferred over into psychology, and while in psychology was doing, studies on human performance and psychic ability and other stuff, and witnessed some of those tests, and then drew some very severe conclusions about what is and what isn't possible within, human consciousness. And from that point, drove home a message of limits for pretty much the better part of the rest of his career. He recently was married. I don't know how recently, a few years ago at this point, probably. But in the marriage, I remember reading an article that he wrote about the marriage, because he married a German girl, and they were having the marriage in the States where they live, and her parents sent over a box of things from Germany for the wedding for her, her memorabilia and stuff, belongings. And in the box was an old radio, and it was a radio that her grandfather used to listen to. Used to listen to music and or football on, things like that, soccer, and it was broken. So Michael Shermer, being an engineer of sorts, digs into this and disassembles this thing and solders and cleans it up and replaces some things and puts it all back together and turns it on, tries to get a sound out of it, or roll it to a station. He can't get it to work, and he spent hours doing this thing. So he just wrapped it up in its cord and put it back in the nightstand, in the drawer of the nightstand. The next day, he thought he was going to get it for her, like kind of a wedding gift, to have it refurbished. The next day, the wedding is going to happen, and that is going to happen down away from the house, in the bedroom and all that. And as the wedding procession begins, something in the house happens. And when they all come back up to the house, Michael Shermer writes, I came into the house and I could hear music. And he goes, and we're all looking at our phones and our tablets and, where is this coming from? Everybody's checking to make sure that, music's not on, and back and forth. And he says, I came into the bedroom, and in the drawer of the nightstand, the radio was playing music. And he said, it shook my skepticism to the core. And then his children, who were up there watching the wedding from up at the house as it was down below in a garden area, said that started playing the minute the wedding waltz began. And yeah, I have not since that time read a lot of scathing, skeptical reviews from Michael Shermer, because it's only a matter of time before all of us, despite our level of skepticism, it's easy to be skeptical from a third-party perspective, removed from the reality of that interaction with something in the non-physical. But when it confronts you, it will shake your skepticism, and you cannot qualify what that was. You cannot explain it away, how that happened or why it happened. You have to be with it and then search within yourself and decide how, in being one of those 2%, are now squarely in the 76%, possibly making a journey into the 24%. So you don't want to be the person that sets his newfound belief on fire and puts him back into the 2%. You just don't want to be that. But I thought that was an interesting story of transform, or at least a moderate level of transformation for a man. So me now, in this remote viewing unit, I was dissatisfied with the process. I did not understand how I thought they were going to train me in this program. And they told me that this training program could take 12 to 18 months to learn to become an operational remote viewer. Operational remote viewer means you're ready to actually start spying. That's what that means. So I thought, oh my God, I have doomed myself to the next 12 to 18 months to do this. And what everybody told me before I came here, the commander of the past unit, Colonel Day, all these people who told me, you'll never recover from this. This is nothing but an organization of misfits and freaks. And if you go do this, your career is over. They said that. But yeah, here I was. So I walked into the first weeks of my training doing what you always do as a good soldier in training in a military school. You just do what they tell you to do. They told me to read everything in the historical file, which was 4 drawers high and nearly 3 feet deep, for every drawer. And I read every file. I started at the first one in the top drawer. And when I ended with the last file in the bottom drawer, I was pretty filled up with everything that had gone on, in the study and the science and the art and the development and the arguments and everything else that went on with this organization and within the US and outside the US. And okay, I was ready. And so it starts. And the first person standing in front of me as my primary instructor is Gabrielle Pettengale. My whole point in this training was that I fought against pretty much everything. I disbelieved everything that I did. And despite the happy pep talks at the conclusion of each level of the training or any practical exercise, I still in my mind disputed and refuted as to whether or not I was actually doing everything that they were claiming that I was doing. That went on for about 6 weeks. But as each stage of the protocol was taught, the aperture of my awareness was widening, and the empirical evidence of the product, even in training, began to mount to the point that it was no longer debatable from my perspective. When that happened, the day that happened, that was the day that I experienced a paradigm shift. That was the day that I stopped believing that there was something beyond the physical and maybe I was part of it. And that was the day that I now knew that there was something beyond the physical and that I was part of it, could interact with it, could grow with it, learn from it, contribute to it, and all other manner of exchange with it. So believing to knowing, from my perspective, was the greatest transformation that anyone in the pursuit of this kind of knowledge could ever have. And it changed my life in that moment forever. How I dealt with that in the coming years had a lot of struggles and ups and downs, and you can ask me questions about that. But hopefully in this gathering, and what we'll do certainly the next time I'm with you for 5 hours, I won't have to tell this story again, and we can get on with the business of the kinds of things that I want to talk to you beyond this point. Okay.
Great, sounds fascinating. And yes, we will be joining David on the 24th of June for the Australians and 23rd for the US. He's doing a 5-hour thing. Yeah, so that would be, if you want to learn more, that would be amazing. But we've got, yeah, maybe we've got about 10 minutes of questions. Anybody want to ask David questions?
Uh, 29, 28, 29. That's true in a classroom environment. It's true that in a classroom environment where everybody is learning and struggling together, there is a dialogue, especially in the Zoom classes. There's a dialogue that goes on in the chat rooms. There's dialoguing that goes on with the small group leaders. There's dialogue that goes on in the Q&A. The way that we do the feedback, the summary feedback, where the small group leaders, show the entire class what their small, the high points from their small group. And I do a final summary, wrapping up the high points of the entire class to the entire class. And in your small group, every viewer starts right at the very top of their session summary and begins with, my perceptions of the target were, and they go through the summary format that has your introductory paragraph, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, stage 5, stage 6, and then my final, conclusions about the target are this. And they share sketches and verbal and visual sensory data, emotional impact, aesthetic impact, intangible data, all these things are shared. So there's a tremendous outlaying of the experience, and you get to see how everybody did. And you also get to see that people who do extraordinarily well one day don't do extraordinarily well the next day, because every viewer is different, day to day, target to target, session to session. And that reinforces for you that it's not that you lack ability. It's that wherever you are in your performance cycle, you've yet to peak in that. Some people come into a class and peak late in a class. Some people come into class and don't really peak at all in the class. Some people come in, peak early, then don't do well as you get into later stages, 5 and 6. Some people sort of have a long curve, a performance curve all the way through the class. Some start off well, hit a trench, and then come back up at the end. It doesn't matter. The objective is that when you go through the training, all I care about is that you witness others and experience for yourself enough empirical data to shift you from believing to knowing. And if that has happened, then my training objective is met. If it doesn't happen, which it rarely doesn't happen, but sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't happen, then my job is to make sure I get to plug you back into another course or remediate you in whatever training concept it is that you don't understand, or encourage you to, to continue with the offline training, getting together with a practice group and those kinds of things. And then kind of follow up to make sure that you have, what I want to hear is, I know, I got this now. And then what you do once that happens, I don't care. Remote viewing it's a tool. It's a hammer in a bag. It's an intelligence collection tool that can be used in medical diagnostic and law enforcement investigative and other things, right? In support of television programs, but it's a tool. And that's all it is. It's not the end all be all. It's a dogma, protocol driven discipline, that was designed not to be, free flow and whatever. It was designed to have a consistency of an intelligence product. That's what it was designed to do. But I've never seen anything that will give you an empirical evidence of the fact that you are more than the physical than that. The rest of it is typically predominantly anecdotal, but not remote viewing. So once you shift from belief to knowing, then the world is your oyster. Grab whatever floats your boat, and make that a new discipline for you. Make that your new pursuit. You now are armed with knowledge that you have done and gained through the work that you did in the physical and the non-physical, and through an empirical evidence. You watched yourself and 50 other students do this. So there's no question. And that's a powerful place to be as you move on with some other pursuit, if that's what you choose to do. Lots of people stay with remote viewing, but not everybody.
Thank you. Maybe we just have 2 more questions, and then I don't know if you want to stay to the midnight hour answering questions or not, but we can play that.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Here. Yeah, really?
Oh yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
wow.
I'm
Okay,
fine.
just one question.
I still have a half a cup of coffee. I'm good to go.
Okay. All right. So one question, even with training, has other psychic or esoteric specialities, speaking with angels, those who have passed, influenced or affected remote viewing outcomes?
Can you, I'm sorry to ask you to repeat that again,
Sure.
but that was.
Sure. So even if you've had the remote viewing training, has other psychic or esoteric specialities, such as speaking with angels or those who have passed away, influenced or affected remote viewing outcomes?
Well, yeah, with caveat. You have to forget what you think you know already. All right. If you come into a protocol driven process like remote viewing is, coordinate remote viewing is, extended remote viewing and other levels of remote viewing training are not protocol heavy. They still have protocols, but they're considerably different. And to give you a comparison, once I was trained as a coordinator remote viewer and I was offered the opportunity to become an extended remote viewer, I never looked back. I mean, you would have to pull my fingernails out to get me to do a coordinate remote viewing session again. I don't like it, but the problem is being an educator and a trainer, I know it. I know it forward and backward and upside down and inside out. I know everything there is to know about it. And I know that because I was trained by some of the best, Mel Riley, Gabrielle, and I know it because I understand the physics behind it and why it works. And that's empowering and reassuring and validating. And so, yeah, but if you come in to learn this and you come in feeling like you have all of these other abilities, my caution is always to you at the beginning of the class to forget about that. You can't come in and learn an entirely new discipline trying to see it through the lens of what you already think you know. You have to wipe yourself clean of that and just say, hey, you know, I'm here to learn something new. And if you can do that, then you're not going to be affected by it. But if you come in expecting that everything you do in remote viewing is going to be adaptable to the lens through which you have done your other work, you're probably going to be disappointed because you're going to conflict. It's like too many Wi-Fi signals overlapping on top of each other, right? From the same modem. It just ends up, you don't have the bandwidth for it. You can't get out of your own way. You have too many expectations, self-imposed. And one thing remote viewers learn is the best way to get through coordinate remote viewing and move from belief to knowing is to let go of the outcome. Let go of the outcome, stop trying to be right, do the work, detect, decode, and objectify, learn the structure, dance with the structure. It's a brilliant creation by a brilliant man. It has a self-correcting aspect to it. It has an answer to everything that can possibly happen during the session. It is truly a science, an art and science miracle as a creation for training people to go into an altered state of consciousness and to rediscover an ability that we were born with. And that's another piece of the message, is that, you know, when the CIA contracted Stanford Research Institute in Palo Alto to answer 3 deliverable questions in this sole source contract. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a government contractor. I know that there were more than just 3 deliverables, but there were 3 principal deliverables here. Number 1, can you validate scientifically that there was a human ability to operate outside the physical, to operate as a psychic, if you will? Deliverable number 2, can you tell us who will be good at this so we can go find them and bring them? And deliverable number 3, can you develop a training protocol so you can replicate this performance? They delivered on 2 of those. They delivered on the first one, you know, within a year and a half. Absolutely. Yes, there is an ability. We have proven it. Absolutely. And the CIA, being the CIA, turned right around and hired 2 independent audit agencies and sent them in to review their science to make sure that, in fact, their science was good and that the answer that they had given them was scientifically sustainable and accurate. The next answer given was probably one of the more poignant things ever to come out of this program. And that was that they said, our research has indicated that this is not unique to any one individual for any reason, that this is an inherent ability in every human being. Every human being. In other words, we are born with these gifts. We are born with this ability to operate on a scale of omniscience, you know, omnipresence, you know, and to recognize our eternal nature. In fact, omniscience, omnipresence, those things are words that are ancient Latin that were ascribed to mankind long before, you know, the King James Version of the Bible was written. Those were words that you were used to describe human ability, and then they were taken away and used to describe only the abilities assigned to deity. They were stripped from you as descriptors of you. Yeah. And
thank you, David. That I think that's a great point to end on. That's amazing, you know, so we're a lot more capable and amazing than what we are taught. So thank you so much for, I guess, being a guinea pig in that kind of scenario, and then being able to bring us a training which you know, really helps, like it's a safer way, or knowing all the risks and yeah, that goes with it. So really, really appreciate that. Yeah, you had to take the first hits and then come back and develop something safer for us to do. So thank you so much. It's so fascinating. Sorry, we have to move on for our second speaker.
I'll see you all when next I see you then.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, David. Yeah, really appreciate it. It's been an honor and
Bye, everyone.
privilege to
Thank
have
you.
you. Thank you. Bye-bye.